It sounds new age, and it probably is. It's the concept of abolishing hierarchy. But if you give employees responsibility, will they sink or swim? I'm now joined by Brian Robertson, who claims to have birthed the system, to see how buoyant the idea really is. So Brian, holacracy. I don't want to sound like a skeptic, but unless you have a workforce of self-starters, I simply can't see this working.
There's a common misconception that holacracy just abolishes hierarchy and doesn't replace it with anything. And I think that would be a terrible idea. If you just throw out bosses and have total chaos, you're not going to get work done. It's not going to be aligned. Holacracy replaces it with a different process. And that's key. It's still ordered. It's actually more structured and ordered than a typical workforce. You just get there differently. Instead of managers breaking down the structure and defining the roles and responsibilities, you have some processes that do that instead, that are more dynamic and more agile.
So what is holacracy? What does it promise?
We've been using management hierarchy in its current form for the past 80 years or thereabouts, which makes it actually a pretty old technology. And our world has changed a lot since then. There's a lot more demands on responsiveness, agility, flexibility from companies. Our management hierarchy is not the most flexible form of organization. It's kind of more like a feudal system. And in our broader societies, we learned long ago that when we have the right framework of rules and give people more freedom within that framework to go pursue their purposes, we end up with something like a modern free market, which is actually much more efficient at allocating resources than a top-down bureaucracy ever could be. And holacracy is basically an approach for bringing that kind of structuring inside a company.
Give me examples of companies this has actually worked for.
One of the most famous out there right now is Zappos. They're a very famous company in the US, about 1,500 employees. They're the largest to date that has done it end-to-end. But there are larger companies that have pilots, like the state of Washington, a government agency, is piloting it. And then there's smaller companies, Medium, run by one of the founders of Twitter.
And so can this concept actually work at scale, or is it just for sort of smaller companies?
Yeah, well, the largest fully end-to-end we have is 1,500 employees. And we know that at that scale, it does work. They're still on the journey, they're still learning a lot, but what we're seeing, early signs, it's adding value and it's achieving the results that they're looking for. So if anything, I would guess it's more scalable than a management hierarchy. Think of the bureaucracy that sets in and how much waste you end up with as you add layers and layers of management, versus in a city where the larger you get, the more innovation you have in the city. And that's because there isn't this bureaucracy slowing things down. There's more of a peer-to-peer emergent order, right? We all are pursuing our creativity and expressing it, but we have bounds of how we work together. We have a framework to work within. And then the more people you get, the more innovation you get, the more creativity.
Well, I imagine you've tried this with your own sort of experience. So tell me, how is it implemented? What sort of challenges did you have to overcome? And how did it impact on productivity?
It is a huge change. And that is one of the challenges of it, right? You're changing the power structure of a company. You're having to retrain everyone internally we all know how to work within a management hierarchy. We know how to please the boss, how to influence, how to play the politics. And when you replace all that with a different set of rules, it's like learning a new sport. There's a slowing down to speed up, right? We have to pull back, we have to learn a new way to influence. And another key piece of holacracy, it's really trying to dig deeper to the root causes of things, and there's a continual improvement process at that level, which means a lot of the things that day-to-day in companies we kind of ignore, processes that aren't quite right or whatever, holacracy forces us to really dig down and address some root issues.
So if it's such a big change, through the history of business, there have been hugely successful companies with traditional management structures. Why should they change?
You know what? If it's working for them and they're not having any issues as a result of it, I don't think they should. What I hear from most of the CEOs that are taking the leap, though, they're seeing the limits of what their management hierarchies can do, given the world we're in today. So consider, again, 30 years ago, the demands from the workforce even weren't that high. Yet today, 80% of workers are completely disengaged, some of them actively sabotaging their own company. It's no wonder we need new approaches to organization when suddenly we have these millennials that are demanding meaning and purpose in their work. We have the world around us changing so fast. The pace of change is higher than it's ever been. The complexity in the world. We're a little company. My company's 13 people. We're global in a way you couldn't have possibly been even 20 years ago, right? Or 50 years ago.
So under the umbrella of holacracy, how do you deal with somebody who just isn't motivated, a clock watcher, if you will? Do you cut the dead wood or do you persevere?
Well, it depends. And sometimes you cut and sometimes you stick with it. I think one of the interesting things is, why are people like that, right? And maybe it's not always something about them, but something about the system they're in. So when you're in a system where you have a parental manager, that doesn't evoke intrinsic motivation. That evokes people watching the clock and wanting to get out of there and acting like children because we're treating them like children. So what I see again and again is when you don't do that, when you allow people to actually be adults and have real responsibility and real autonomy, many of them rise to the occasion. And you don't have to worry about that. and some don't. And you do need to deal with those people. And Holacracy, that's no different than any other company. You're going to have somebody that needs to remove somebody from roles if they're not performing. You've got to have some way of firing people when that needs to happen. Holacracy doesn't change that.
Tell me, how do you deal with egos? Because having a title like CEO, managing director, these are prestigious, and people like to be in management positions.
Usually the people that bring this in are ready to say, you know what, I just want whatever works, and I'll deal with getting my self-esteem met from some other way than my title. But the people in the companies have sometimes a bit of a transition. But some people make the leap and then find, you know what, I can define my self-esteem by the value I create, not by the title I've achieved, which I'd argue is actually way better for our organizations. I want more people in my company defining their self-esteem based on the value they're creating than their title.